the dojo smelled of fresh wood and sweat. The sound of fast punches and the sharp slap of bare feet on the floor filled the air. Young students, full of energy, practiced their kicks and moves, their voices loud and full of pride. They were strong, fast, and sure of themselves. No one expected that today something strange would happen, something that would change how they looked at strength and respect forever. The door of the dojo opened slowly, making a small creak. A thin old woman stepped inside. Her back was a little bent, her hair silver and tied in a simple bun. She wore plain clothes, not a uniform like the others. Her hands held a small cloth bag, the kind a grandmother might carry to the market. For a moment, the room went quiet as everyone turned to look at her. Then the whispers began. "Who is that?" a boy near the wall whispered. "She looks lost," another said with a small laugh. "She's too old for this place," someone else added. Soon the giggles turned louder. A few students covered their mouths, trying not to laugh openly, but their eyes were full of teasing. The old woman didn't seem to mind. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, watching the young fighters with a soft smile, as if remembering something far away. The young instructor, a tall man in his late 20s, walked forward. He bowed slightly out of habit, but his face showed confusion. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a polite but firm tone. "Can I help you? This is a martial arts class. Are you here to pick someone up?" The old woman shook her head. Her voice was calm, gentle, yet it carried clearly across the dojo. "No, young man. I came to see. To watch. Maybe to learn." The students behind him began to laugh again, this time louder. One boy muttered, "Learn? She can barely walk straight." Another said, "Karate is not for old people. She might break a bone." Their laughter bounced off the walls. Some even mimicked slow walking, holding their backs as if they were old. The dojo, once a place of discipline, turned into a room of childish giggles. But the old woman didn't get angry. She stood still, her eyes calm, her hands folded in front of her. The instructor frowned at his students. "Enough," he said sharply. They went quiet, but the smirk stayed on their faces. He turned back to the old woman. "Ma'am, this is not a show. These are serious lessons. We train hard here." "I know," she said simply. "That's why I came." Something in her tone made him pause. There was no pride, no challenge, just a quiet certainty that felt heavier than his words. Before he could speak again, the main door of the dojo slid open. The sensei walked in. The air changed at once. Every student straightened, their faces serious now. The sensei was an older man, but strong, his presence commanding respect with just a glance. His eyes scanned the room and then they stopped on the old woman. His face froze. For a heartbeat, his expression shifted, surprise, then something deeper. He stepped closer, his brows drawn tight. The students looked from him to the woman, confused. Why was the sensei staring at her like that? The old woman looked back at him with the same calm eyes. For a moment, it was as if the years rolled away, as if they were the only two people in that room. "Do you know her, sensei?" the young instructor asked, unsure. The sensei didn't answer right away. He walked closer, his steps slow, his eyes never leaving her face. "I think I do," he said finally, his voice low. The students glanced at each other. Whispers began again, but softer this time, more curious than cruel. The old woman gave a small smile. "It has been a long time," she said quietly. No one laughed now. The sensei's eyes narrowed, and a strange respect began to show on his face, something the students had never seen him give so quickly to anyone. "Why have you come?" he asked. "To see," she said. "To remember. And maybe, to remind." The dojo fell silent. Even the air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were waiting for her next words. The students, who only moments ago had mocked her, now found themselves staring, wondering what kind of woman could make their sensei pause like this. Who was she? And why did he look almost cautious? Something was about to happen. They didn't know what, but for the first time that day, none of them wanted to laugh. The air inside the dojo was thick with questions. The students, who had been so loud a few minutes ago, now shifted uneasily on their feet. Their eyes moved between the sensei and the old woman. Something about her calmness felt heavy, like the weight of a storm just before it breaks. The sensei stood still, his hands behind his back, his sharp gaze fixed on her. "Would you like to watch?" he asked carefully. The old woman smiled faintly. "No," she said. "I would like to move." The words were soft, but they fell into the room like a stone in water, silent at first, then spreading ripples everywhere. A boy in the front whispered to his friend, "Move? She can barely stand." His friend smirked. "She'll trip before she even lifts a leg." The young instructor glanced at them sharply, but even he looked unsure. "Sensei, you mean to let her try?" he asked. The sensei nodded once, his face unreadable. "Yes. Let her." The old woman set her cloth bag down gently in a corner. She walked to the center of the mat, her steps slow but steady. Her back was a little bent, but there was no shake in her hands, no fear in her eyes. "Who will come first?" she asked, her voice calm as still water. No one moved. The students looked at each other, unsure whether this was a trick or some strange lesson. Then the sensei spoke. "Toru," he called. A boy of 16 stepped forward. He was quick, proud, and one of the louder ones who had laughed earlier. "Yes, sensei," he said, trying to sound brave. "Light sparring," the sensei said. "Do not harm her. Test her balance." Toru bowed, a small grin tugging at his lips. "Yes, sensei." The old woman bowed back, her eyes calm. The room fell silent. Everyone watched as Toru stepped in, raising his hands in a standard stance. He moved slowly at first, his punch soft, more a tap than a strike. He wanted to make the moment funny. But the punch never landed. With the smallest step to the side, the old woman moved just enough. His fist cut empty air. The students blinked. Toru frowned, adjusted his footing, and tried again, this time a little faster. Again, she shifted barely an inch, and his arm passed by like a breeze. "Is that all?" she asked gently. A few students chuckled nervously. The laughter was not as confident as before. Toru bit his lip and came in with a faster strike, this time a small kick to follow. His foot barely left the ground before he felt his own weight betray him. The old woman's hand touched his wrist, not a grab, not a strike, just a touch, and suddenly his balance slipped. He stumbled forward, trying not to fall, his face red with surprise. "How?" someone whispered. The old woman stepped back, still calm. "Next," she said. The sensei's eyes glimmered. "Rina," he called. A taller girl, known for her speed, stepped forward. She bowed quickly, her face set in determination. "I won't go easy," she said. "I don't want you to," the old woman replied. Rina attacked fast, a sharp sidekick aimed low. The old woman did not block. She simply shifted her weight, her body flowing like water around a rock. The kick missed, her momentum carried too far, and before she knew it, the old woman's palm pressed lightly on her shoulder. Rina found herself kneeling on the mat without knowing how she got there. The dojo was dead silent now. The teasing smirks had vanished. The whispers had turned to a tense hush. The sensei walked closer, his eyes never leaving the old woman's hands. "You still remember," he said, almost to himself. The old woman looked at him, her lips curving in a knowing smile. "I never forgot." One of the boys in the back raised his hand, his voice small now. Who is she, sensei?" The sensei did not answer. Instead, he turned to the class. "You all laughed," he said quietly. "Because you saw wrinkles and slow steps. You saw age, and you thought it meant weakness." The students lowered their eyes. "But strength," the sensei continued, "is not only in muscles or speed. There is another kind, one you cannot see with foolish eyes." The old woman spoke then, her voice soft but carrying across the hall. "You train your bodies, and that is good. But your hearts, they are still learning. Her words stung more than any strike. The young instructor, still standing near the edge, finally stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, trying to keep his tone steady, "where did you learn this?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Here," she said at last. The student's head snapped toward her. "Here," someone repeated. She nodded slowly. "Long before you. Long before even your sensei took his first step on this mat." The sensei's eyes softened. "I thought I'd never see you again," he said. The old woman's smile deepened, just a little. "Life takes us far, but roots remain." The students were no longer laughing. They were staring, some in awe, some in confusion, some in shame. The same woman they had mocked only minutes ago had just danced through their strongest beginners like wind through leaves. The sensei turned to his class. "She came to see," he said. "Now, you will watch. And you will learn." The old woman bowed slightly. "Only if they want to," she said. "Force teaches nothing. Curiosity teaches everything." Several students lowered their heads in respect, for the first time without being told to. Toru and Rina, still rubbing their wrists in pride, stepped back silently, their faces burning with the memory of their own laughter. Something had changed in that dojo. The old woman picked up her small bag, not to leave, but to place it carefully beside the sensei's spot, as though she belonged there all along. And for the first time that afternoon, not one student spoke. They simply waited, because now they needed to know, who was she really? The dojo was quiet now. The smell of sweat and polished wood lingered in the air, but the sound of laughter was gone. The students stood in two lines, still breathing hard from their earlier training, yet their eyes kept drifting toward the old woman who had just turned their world upside down. A few minutes ago, she was only a stranger, someone to tease, someone who looked weak. Now, every whisper was replaced with a single question hanging in the air: who is she? The sensei stood before her, his hands folded behind his back, his expression no longer stern but almost respectful. "You haven't been here for many years," he said, his voice low. "And yet your steps still know the path." The old woman's lips curved into a faint smile. "The body forgets many things," she replied. "But the heart remembers." The young instructor, still confused, finally spoke. "Ma'am, forgive me for asking, but what is your name?" The old woman turned her calm eyes toward him. "My name is Akiko," she said. The name meant nothing to most of the students. They exchanged glances, frowning slightly, whispering the name as if tasting it for the first time. But for the sensei, the name struck deep. His eyes widened for a moment, and he let out a slow breath. "Akiko-sensei," he whispered, almost to himself. The student's head snapped toward him. "Sensei? Did you just call her sensei?" one boy asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. The sensei ignored the question. He walked closer to the old woman, Akiko, and bowed slightly, not out of habit, but out of genuine respect. "I was a boy when I last heard that name." "You trained here, didn't you?" Akiko nodded slowly. "Long ago, when this place was different. There were no mirrors on the walls then, no trophies on the shelves. Only the sound of wooden floors and the voices of those who trained with discipline." The students listened in silence, the room heavy with her words. Even the arrogant ones, who had mocked her so easily, now stared as if they were children hearing a legend for the first time. "Sensei," one girl whispered, "who is she really?" The sensei turned to face them all. "Akiko-sensei was once the heart of this dojo. Before I was born, she was already teaching here. They called her the Iron Willow because she could bend without breaking and strike without anger." Gasps rippled through the students. They had heard stories, old ones, about a mysterious woman who once protected the town during a time of unrest, but those were only tales told in hushed voices. "You mean, she's real?" Toru, the boy who had first tried to spar with her, spoke up, his voice full of regret and awe. "She is very real," the sensei said. "When the city was troubled decades ago, when gangs ruled the streets, she was the one who stood between them and the people. She trained not for medals, not for fame, but for duty." Akiko chuckled softly. "That was a long time ago. The body grows old, but the lessons remain. I did not come here to boast of my past. Then why? The young instructor asked, still puzzled. Her gaze moved slowly across the students, stopping on each face that had laughed at her when she walked in. Because I heard the noise, she said gently. I heard your voices from outside. Strong voices. But no respect in them. The students lowered their eyes. The shame burned deeper now. It wasn't just about losing to her, it was about how they had treated her before they even knew her name. Martial arts is not only about fists, Akiko continued. It is about the heart. You train your muscles every day, but your hearts, they still run wild like children. Rina, the girl who had tried to strike her earlier, stepped forward hesitantly. We didn't know, Sensei, she said softly. That is the point, Akiko replied. You should not need to know a name to show respect. The sensei nodded, his eyes thoughtful. She is right. Respect is not given only to those who can fight. It is given to all, because strength comes and goes, but respect remains. One of the younger boys, barely 13, raised his hand timidly. Did you really fight people before? Like in real battles? Akiko looked at him, her eyes soft but distant, as if a door inside her mind had opened to old, dusty memories. Yes, she said after a moment. I fought when there was no other choice. I fought to protect. I fought to stop harm, not to cause it. The students leaned in closer, their eyes wide. The dojo had turned from a place of daily training into a hall of stories and lessons. The mirrors on the walls reflected not just their bodies now, but their humbled faces. The young instructor stepped forward. Would you show us more? Teach us something we do not know? Akiko looked at him for a long time, then at the sensei. Only if he wishes, she said, nodding toward the man who now stood silent, watching her with deep respect. The sensei straightened. I wish it, he said simply. A soft murmur went through the students. They were not used to seeing their sensei speak like that to anyone. Akiko walked to the center of the mat again, her small steps echoing in the room. She raised her hands, not high, not in a fighting stance, but in a calm, flowing motion that seemed almost like a wave of wind. This is what you have forgotten, she said. Balance. Flow. To see the attack before it comes, and to move like water, not like stone. She demonstrated slowly. Her movements were gentle, but the way her feet slid across the mat made no sound. Her hands traced small circles, her weight shifted with precision. Even the air felt different around her. The students tried to copy, but their steps were heavy, their hands stiff. She smiled faintly. Not yet, she said. But you will learn. If your hearts are ready. The sensei bowed again, deeper this time. Forgive us for forgetting what you once taught, he said. Akiko shook her head. I am not here to be honored. I am here to see if your hearts can still carry the old ways. And for the first time since she entered the dojo, a strange silence filled the room, not the awkward silence of mockery, but the respectful quiet of people who had just seen a part of history come alive before them. The dojo was no longer the same place it had been just an hour ago. The laughter had faded, replaced by a silence filled with curiosity and a growing sense of respect. The students now stood straighter, their earlier mockery replaced by unease. They had seen two of their fellow students fall without a single harsh strike from the old woman. They had heard her name, Akiko, and the weight it carried in their sensei's voice. But not everyone was ready to bow to her yet. From the back of the line, a tall, broad-shouldered boy stepped forward. His name was Kenji, the star pupil of the dojo. He was fast, strong, and often proud of it. The trophies on the shelves bore his name, and his victories in local tournaments had made him a hero among his classmates. He did not like what he had seen. To him, it was a trick, a game played with the weak. Sensei, Kenji said loudly, breaking the silence. With respect, this is not proof. A few lucky steps, a soft touch, this is not true strength. The sensei's eyes narrowed slightly. Kenji, he said, mind your tone. Kenji bowed quickly, but his jaw was tight. Forgive me, sensei. But I want to see it for myself. The students murmured. Some nodded, they wanted to see it too. Could the old woman really handle Kenji, the best among them? Akiko looked at him without anger, only calm. You doubt, she said softly. I do, Kenji replied. Because strength must be tested. And respect, his eyes flicked toward the younger students, must be earned. The sensei watched silently, his hands folded behind his back. If this is what you need to learn, then so be it, he said. But Kenji, remember your control. Kenji nodded and stepped onto the mat. He bowed stiffly, his eyes sharp. I will not hurt you, he said, though his voice carried a hint of pride. Akiko bowed in return. I do not fear being hurt, she said simply. The room held its breath. The students moved closer, forming a wide circle around the mat. Even the young instructor stood still, unsure whether he should intervene or let this lesson unfold. Kenji moved first, his stance solid, his muscles tense. He circled her like a wolf watching its prey. Akiko did not move, only turned her head slightly to follow him. Her hands were loose at her sides, her feet light. He struck fast, a straight jab toward her shoulder, quick enough to test her reflexes but not full power. She leaned just enough, and his fist met nothing but empty air. Kenji frowned and stepped in again, this time a hook aimed low. She turned her body, her foot sliding back, and the hook missed by an inch. The students whispered. This was no trick. Her movements were too smooth, too natural. Kenji's pride flared. He quickened his pace, throwing a series of punches, each one sharper than the last. His arms blurred as he tried to corner her. But each time, her body flowed away, never far, never rushed, as if she already knew where his fist would be before he even threw it. Stop playing. Kenji snapped, his breath growing heavy. Akiko raised an eyebrow. I am not playing, she said. Then, with a calmness that almost looked lazy, she stepped forward. Her hand brushed his wrist lightly, her foot shifted inside his stance, and suddenly, Kenji's balance was gone. His legs tangled under him. He stumbled forward, his arms flailing to catch himself. The mat caught his fall with a heavy thud. The students gasped. Kenji's face flushed red as he pushed himself back to his feet. Again, he barked. Kenji, the sensei warned. But the boy was already moving. His pride burned hotter now. He lunged with a sharp kick aimed at her side, fast, powerful, the kind that could knock the wind from a man twice her size. The old woman did not block. She stepped into it. Her movement was a whisper against the mat, her hand barely touching his leg. She guided his power past her with a soft twist of her wrist, and Kenji found himself spinning, his own force turning against him. He hit the mat a second time, harder this time, the air rushing out of his lungs. The dojo erupted in a stunned silence. Not a sound came from the watching students. Even the mirrors on the wall seemed to hold their reflection still, frozen in disbelief. Akiko stepped back, her breathing calm. Strength without balance is just noise, she said softly. Kenji stayed on his knees, his chest rising and falling, his pride cracked wide open. His hands pressed the mat, and for a moment, everyone thought he would spring back up again. But he didn't. Slowly, his head lowered. His forehead touched the mat. I understand, he said quietly. A ripple of surprise ran through the class. Kenji, the strongest, the proudest among them, was bowing. The sensei stepped forward. His face was unreadable, but there was a faint trace of a smile in his eyes. Kenji, he said, today you have learned more than in all your trophies. Kenji looked up, his voice heavy but sincere. She is a master, he said. Akiko shook her head. No, she corrected softly. I am just old. But age teaches what strength forgets. The students bowed one by one, not because they were told, but because their hearts moved them to. The teasing that had filled the dojo only an hour before now felt like a bad dream. The young instructor stepped closer, his face serious. What you did, that was not ordinary, he said. Will you teach us? Akiko's eyes softened. Only if you are ready to learn, she said. Not the moves, those you already practice. but the meaning behind them. The sensei nodded deeply, his hands pressed together in front of his chest. "We are ready," he said. "And I should have invited you sooner." The old woman gave a small smile. "Things happen when they must," she said. The students looked at her differently now, not as a stranger, not as someone to laugh at, but as someone they wished to understand. Kenji moved to the side of the mat, his pride bruised but his respect whole. From that moment on, the dojo felt heavier with something unseen, an invisible rope tying them to a past they had forgotten and a lesson they were only beginning to learn. The dojo was different now. The air that once held pride and noise had turned quiet, almost sacred. The mirrors reflected faces no longer full of arrogance but of thought, of curiosity, of a quiet respect that had been missing for a long time. The young students stood in neat lines, their eyes fixed on the old woman standing in the center of the mat. Her name, Akiko, was no longer just a name. It carried weight now. Kenji, the strongest among them, stood at the side, his pride softened. Toru and Rina, the first two who had sparred with her, now kept their arms folded and their heads lowered. Even the young instructor who had doubted her earlier stood straight, his eyes serious, as if he too was about to learn something he had missed all his life. Akiko looked at them all, her hands folded gently. "You train well," she said softly. "Your kicks are strong, your punches fast. But do you know what these mean if your heart is not steady?" The students glanced at each other, unsure how to answer. No one spoke. She walked slowly across the mat, her steps light but full of purpose. "You think fighting is only about winning," she continued. "That is what the world shows you now, medals, applause, shiny belts. But long ago, this place taught something else." The sensei, who stood silently near the wall, lowered his head slightly. "It did," he murmured. Akiko stopped in front of the students. "We learned to stop fights, not start them. We learned to stand, not to show off. And we learned the first rule, respect." Her eyes moved from face to face. "Respect is not a bow at the start and the end. Respect is in how you see the world. It is in how you treat those weaker than you, and those you think cannot match your strength." Rina's cheeks flushed. Toru's fingers curled at his sides. Kenji kept his eyes fixed on the floor. Akiko raised her hand and gestured for one of the boys to come forward. It was a small boy this time, no older than 12, his movements stiff with nervousness. "Show me your punch," she said. The boy stepped forward and punched the air, his fist fast and loud. The sound of his sleeve snapping echoed through the hall. "Strong," Akiko said. "Now again." He did it again. This time, she stepped closer and lightly touched his shoulder. "Too tight," she whispered. The boy blinked. "Tight?" She nodded. "You use all your strength, but you close your heart. Feel your feet, feel your breath, then strike." She guided his arm with her hand, adjusting his stance, moving his elbow slightly, softening his wrist. Then she told him to try again. This time, the punch was quieter, less flashy, but it felt different. Even the boy noticed it. He blinked at his own hand. "That," Akiko said, "can stop a fight. The other only starts one." The students murmured. It was a strange lesson, but something about it made sense. The dojo was not about who could shout the loudest or strike the hardest, it was about something deeper. The young instructor spoke finally. "Akiko-sensei, you said you trained here long ago. How did you become so skilled?" For a moment, the old woman's eyes softened, but a shadow passed across her face. "Because I had to," she said. The students leaned closer. The room grew still. "There was a time," she said slowly, "when this city was not safe. There were men who took what they wanted. They feared nothing. The law was weak, the nights were long. I was young then, like you. I trained here every morning and worked every night. One evening, they came to our street. I stood between them and my family." Her voice did not rise. It was calm, but it carried the weight of memory. "I did not fight to win. I fought to protect. And that night, I learned something: strength is not in the fist. It is in the reason why you use it. The students were silent. Even Kenji, who had once been so proud, raised his eyes slowly. There was something in her voice that no trophy could teach. The sensei stepped forward and bowed deeply. We have forgotten that, he said. We teach moves, we teach speed, but we forgot the meaning. Akiko looked at him with a small smile. It is not lost. If you are willing, it can return. The students bowed together now, one by one. Not out of formality, but out of respect that had grown from truth. Akiko straightened her back, her frail frame seeming taller now. I am old, she said. My bones will not last many winters. But a seed can grow even in cold ground if the soil is ready. Kenji stepped forward suddenly. His voice was steady this time, no longer proud but honest. Teach us, he said. Not to fight. To stand. Akiko's smile deepened. Then the lesson begins. She moved her hands, showing a slow, circular motion. It was different from their sharp, straight strikes. Her fingers spread like branches, her steps soft, her breathing deep. The students watched, then copied her. Their movements were stiff at first, awkward, but soon the hall filled with the soft shuffle of feet and the whisper of open palms moving through air. Feel the ground, she said. Do not fight it. Move with it. Feel your breath not as a weapon, but as your center. Minute by minute, the harsh edges of the dojo softened. The students who once measured their worth in punches began to move like water, their anger melting into quiet focus. Toru's shoulders loosened. Rina's strikes lost their tension. Even Kenji's heavy stance began to flow. The sensei watched, his heart heavy and light at the same time. He remembered his own youth, how he had once trained with respect, how the years of competition and pride had slowly changed the dojo's soul. Now, in the hands of this frail woman, it was finding its old rhythm again. Akiko clapped her hands softly. Enough for today, she said. The students stopped, breathing slow, their eyes wide not from exhaustion, but from a new understanding. Tomorrow, she said, you will come again. But not as fighters. As students. They bowed together, this time without being told. And for the first time, the dojo felt alive, not with noise, but with meaning. The next morning, the dojo was silent long before the class began. The sun had barely risen, its soft golden light spilling across the wooden floors. For the first time in years, the young students arrived early, not to boast, not to spar for dominance, but to wait. Kenji stood near the entrance, his uniform freshly pressed. Toru and Rina whispered quietly at the side, their faces calm. The younger ones stretched in silence, their energy different now, not wild, not loud, but focused. Even the young instructor stood with his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the door. When the door finally opened, the old woman stepped inside slowly. Akiko carried no bag, no weapon, only a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Her hair was tied neatly, her back straight despite her age. The students bowed together, their voices soft. Good morning, Akiko-sensei. Her eyes twinkled for a moment. Good morning, she said. She placed the cloth bundle on the floor and unwrapped it. Inside was an old belt, faded, worn, and almost falling apart. The color had long faded, but a faint trace of black still clung to it. This, she said softly, was mine. The sensei stepped forward, his hands slightly trembling. I know that belt, he whispered. I was a boy when I saw you wear it. You were already a master. Akiko smiled faintly. A master only in the eyes of others. Inside, I was still learning. She turned to the students. Do you know why I brought this? Not to show rank. But to remind you, skill fades, but honor remains. The students stood quietly, their eyes fixed on the old belt. It was not shiny, not beautiful, yet it held more weight than any trophy they had ever seen. Akiko stepped onto the mat. Today, she said, we do not fight. We honor. Kenji frowned slightly. Honor? How? She looked at him with calm eyes. By giving what is hardest to give. Respect. She gestured to the mat. Sit. The students sat in 2 rows, their legs folded. The sensei joined them, sitting at the far end. Akiko began to move slowly, demonstrating each motion with care. Her hands traced the air, her feet glided without sound. Every strike begins here, she said, touching her chest. Every block begins here, she said, touching her heart. If you fight only with your body, you will break. If you fight with your heart, you will endure. Toru raised his hand. Akiko-sensei, yesterday you told us about that night, when you stood for your family. Did you win? The dojo went quiet again. Akiko looked at him for a long time. I did not win, she said softly. Not in the way you think. I was hurt, I was knocked down. But my family was safe. That was enough. Rina swallowed. But you fought them alone? I did what I had to, she said simply. Strength is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward even when you are afraid. The young instructor lowered his head. We have been teaching wrongly, he murmured. We made this place about power, not purpose. Akiko placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Then teach differently. It is never too late. Kenji, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly stood. His voice was clear but heavy with emotion. Akiko-sensei, may I ask something? Ask, she said. He took a deep breath. Will you stay? Teach us not just today, but every day? The dojo held its breath. Akiko looked around at their young, hopeful faces. My time is short, she said honestly. But while I am here, I will teach. Kenji bowed deeply. Then teach us one last lesson. Akiko smiled, her eyes warm. Very well. She stepped back to the center of the mat. Rise, she said. The students stood. Stand in line. They lined up. Bow. They bowed. Not to me, she said softly. To what this place should mean. She took the old belt in her hands, tied it gently around her waist, and stood tall. One by one, the students stepped forward. They bowed, not the quick, shallow bow of routine, but a deep, slow bow that came from the heart. Toru bowed. Rina bowed. The smallest boy bowed with trembling hands. Kenji bowed last, his head almost touching the mat. And then, something unexpected happened. The young instructor walked to the side, knelt, and turned to Akiko. Sensei, he said, his voice shaking. Forgive us. Akiko reached down and lifted his chin. There is nothing to forgive, she whispered. You have learned. She looked around the dojo one last time. The walls were the same. The floor was the same. But the spirit was alive again. As the class ended, the students did not rush out as they always did. They stayed, helping her fold the old belt, helping her sit, offering her tea. The sun was high now, its light warm and full. Kenji stood by the door and watched her leave with the sensei by her side. There was no noise, no challenge, no show of strength. Only respect. And in that quiet, they all understood something: the greatest warriors are not the ones who fight the most. They are the ones who teach the world to bow not in fear, but in honor.